Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for listening to our content, and please like and subscribe. Well, back with Pure Athlete, guys. What a great show we just had with Paul. I mean, he's a deep thinker. There's no doubt about it. But let me tell you, man, the drive. And he didn't start playing lacrosse till he was 12.
Yeah.
He was one of the best players to ever play.
Great show. And Paul just has a book coming out here in a couple of weeks. And he talks about different things in the book and all the life lessons that come out of youth sports that we're trying to preach. And he does a great job with all that.
Well, he's a Michael Jordan of lacrosse. I mean, he's probably one of the best of all times. And yet what's inspiring is that he's so passionate now about his post-athletic career and what he's got doing with professional lacrosse, and just, he's an entrepreneur. And so just super inspiring. Yeah.
And I think the cool thing to finish, he's trying to grow the game. You want to talk about a guy that's giving back to the sport that gave him so much. He's truly doing that. So,
yeah, and I got to say, for folks who aren't lacrosse people, because I had one daughter who played 1 year of lacrosse, so I don't know that much about lacrosse, but it is fascinating to me to listen to Paul. So you're going to get a lot out of it.
I'm an assistant coach now. So, Brett, if you ever need anything, I can let you know,
everything.
I know it all now.
Could you give him a personal lesson maybe?
Hell yeah. A little side check. Hope you enjoy the show. Before we get to the podcast, if you have middle school or high school kids that play sports and you don't want to fundraise like me, we got you covered. My buddy Chris Carneal owns Booster. Chris?
We help schools and sports teams raise funds in a super fun and engaging way. In fact, the last 22 years, we've raised $750 million, and we can't wait to help you. Choose booster.com.
Welcome back to Pure Athlete. I'm Jeff, along with Britt and Brad. And guys, I've told you now for 2 years that Braden, my son's playing lacrosse. So I'm so excited today. We're having our first lacrosse player. Probably no one has impacted the sport more than this guy. Went to Johns Hopkins University, played forever in the big leagues for lacrosse, and really has grown the sport probably more than anybody else. But Paul Rabil, thank you for joining us, man.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, guys. Wish I was in the studio with you.
Yeah, no, we did too, man. It'd be great. But, so we're from Atlanta, all three of us. And so for a lot of our listeners that maybe their kids like mine just started playing lacrosse, kind of tell us how lacrosse became your passion growing up and kind of your journey.
Yeah, well, I love what you guys speak to on the sort of modernization of youth sports over the last 20 years. It wasn't the case when I was playing sports growing up. I grew up in Maryland. A lot of people think, oh, well, that's why you play lacrosse. But really the hotbeds of the sport are Baltimore and Long Island and New York. So kids growing up in Manhattan, or kids like me grew up in Montgomery Village, you don't really have exposure to the game. So I actually was first introduced to it when I was 12. My next door neighbor was playing for our local rec team. And at the time, I was excelling in soccer and basketball. Actually, both of my coaches in each of those disciplines were pitching me on doing AAU and club soccer. And that would mean letting go of the other, which I didn't want to do. So I stayed the rec path in basketball and soccer, and gave me a sport to pick up in the spring. So my neighbor gave me his hand-me-down equipment. My older cousin passed down his helmet. We used to go to Play It Again Sports, and I went out for the local rec team. It was a really, really difficult sport to learn, because it's heavily hand-eye stick ball, much like baseball, as you know, much like golf and hockey. But once you learn, it becomes really sticky. But the short version of that is I wanted to quit my first year playing. My mom made me commit to the first season, and then we would reassess. And as that season went on, I acquired the skill a bit more. Fast forward to my sophomore year in high school, it became the sport I was best at, and thereby the sport that I became most passionate about. And it wasn't until my junior year in high school that I really became heavily recruited. At the time still, where college coaches would do most of their recruiting in the spring watching high school games. So all to say, the club business, the privatized youth sport trajectory, I don't think is a bad thing. Only when it comes at the cost of rec programs, which we have seen, and I'm sure we can jump into that. But I care deeply about youth sports. I care through the vehicle that I'm operating now, ELL, what we're doing for the next generation in way of accessibility and opportunity. Love what you guys are doing, and can dig more into my story if you feel you want to.
Absolutely. You know what I love what he said though is, we had Misty May Trainer on who talked how she didn't pick up volleyball till later. You didn't play lacrosse till you're 12. You're one of the greatest players to ever play the sport. And I love that at 8 years old, you don't have to be all in. And I just think that's so powerful that we start off with that.
Totally. And I think there's been a lot of dialogue around sports specialization. And I approach it in a really honest way. If you're going to sport specialize as a young kid, you are going to acquire the skill faster than your peers who are only playing during one season of the calendar year. That's fine. However, you're going to also miss out on the exposure to other athletic movements, other coaching strategies, other gameplay X's and O's that will actually aid you in the game of your choice. So I actually find kids that sport specialize as more likely to get recruited at an earlier age, but less likely to reach their optimal potential in college or pro. So that's sort of the wager that they have to make as parents and kids.
Paul, how do you think your story would have been different if you'd grown up in today's world of lacrosse? For better or for worse?
Yeah, I worry that I would never have played lacrosse. And the reason why is, I come from a middle-class family. My dad sold paper. My mom was an art teacher at a local private school. And as I said, Montgomery Village, Maryland. And we played, my dad always told me that if I had an interest in a sport, he would do his best to get me up into the local program. And what we've actually seen over the last decade and a half is attrition in rec sports. And I think the primary reason for that is as private sports have proliferated, what kids at a young age trade on is relevance. We often talk about peer pressure. And so what happens is rec sports become less relevant. And with all the optionality of a mobile phone and other sports to play, other things to do, video games, kids just don't play rec sports altogether if they're not going to make the private team. So I think that would be a possibility. The other one is I go rec. I continue to work my ass off away from practice, which I think that's where the gains are, right? Practice for your team sport is meant for the team. If you think about it, when you're a lacrosse player, you're going to take 10 to 20 shots at most in practice, and that's through shooting drills. When you're out on your own, you're going to shoot 100 shots or more catered to your skill set. You have to practice away from practice. And that, to me, is why I believe that even if the path had changed, to your question, I would have made it to the level that I got to because I was just obsessed with being on my own and working on my craft.
So Paul, let's back up a little bit. And there in Maryland, you said, you didn't play lacrosse till you were 12. You played other sports. So what else did you play? You didn't become passionate about lacrosse until you started excelling at it. So just talk us through that a little bit.
Well, I was very seasonal. So in the winter, when I play hoops, I was obsessed with hoops and I wanted to keep going. And my dad would be like, right, okay, it's spring. We need to transition you to lacrosse. And then as soon as spring season ended, I'm like, I'm playing summer lacrosse. And he's like, nope, you're going back out for the swim team in the summer. So he did a really good job. And then into soccer in the fall, he did a really good job of sort of mining my immaturity, but also understanding that I had this obsession that would transition from sport to sport and season to season. He knew that was rare and something that he wanted to keep an eye on. But he had a wider sort of idea that the more sports I play, the better athlete I would become. And then my sophomore year in high school, I had gotten so good at lacrosse that we sat down and we were like, okay, I think it's time now to stop playing basketball and soccer or track and field and swimming. And you can just focus on this for this 2-year sprint to try to get you into a school of your dreams. And frankly, I was just at a place now where my prefrontal cortex had begun to develop a little bit more, where I could make a logical decision. The last thing is, parents that are listening, there's a pretty simple gut check around when you can make a decision with your kid on sports specialization. And for me, it starts with, how talented are they? If they're more talented, they're more likely to get to their dreams of playing at the college level. And you can suss out their talent by, are they the best player on their team? Are they one of the best players on the team? Are they one of the best players in the league? You can look at stats, you can look at impact on field. It's actually pretty objective to see if your kid is one of the most talented at what they do. That should be a signal that, okay, let's take this more seriously.
Well, and that's the problem, though. A lot of these parents, as you said, do not have the vision to sit there and accept, like you said, maybe my kid's not the best on the team. And what we talk about is that's okay.
You're there with rosy glasses.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that's our whole thing, is like, it's okay if they're not. You know, we talk about it all the time. Like, you think about what you were said, going through high school, playing all these other sports. If you didn't make it, but the lessons you learned, which I'm sure were a lot, on being a great teammate, work ethic, what you talk about, would have carried you through life. And honestly, what you're doing now, all those lessons have helped.
Yeah. I mean, look, you're never going to start out in a sport and be the best on the team. Just not. You have to learn the game first. So every parent should take a breath when their son or daughter is sort of run-of-the-mill on the team or struggling on the team. Struggle is the friction that we need for momentum. And I talk about this in my book that's coming out on May 7th called The Way of the Champion. It's actually parsed out into 3 segments. The first is amateur, the second is professional, and the third is beyond the game. And the lessons that I incorporate into each of those parts of the book are unique. And then sometimes they reoccur. But amateurism, and call it amateur, is the Latin word for lover of. And you're really an enthusiast, and you love, and you want to find your love as a kid. And that means trying a bunch of things. That means working hard. And then as you become a professional, you begin to profess to your calling. Which means a lot more sacrifices, a long view on things like training and skill acquisition and coaching. But if you even look at the pros, what you'll find is that what they share in common, from Tom Brady to Michael Jordan to Bill Belichick, to Peyton Manning, to Martin Brodeur, to Cy Young, all of those guys have lost mostly more than their peers. Cy Young blew more saves. Martin Brodeur gave up more goals. Bill Belichick's the second losingest coach in NFL history. Michael Jordan missed 9,000 shots. Yeah. You have to build a level of resilience that comes through pain and comes through failure, such that you can grow and hopefully become one of those best that we were just talking about.
That's such a powerful message to kids, but also to parents who need to relay that message to their kids as they're failing. I love that. Paul, we were lucky enough, your assistant sent us a copy of your book. And so as we get to the end of this interview, we want to dig into the book, because there's some real gold there that we want to give you a chance to share a little bit more about. I'm interested a little bit. Jeff said we're here in Atlanta. We all 3 grew up in Atlanta. Some of us a long time ago, that gets mentioned often, but lacrosse wasn't really big in our high schools here in Atlanta, when we were growing up. It's really big today, but I know you're super involved in growing the game of lacrosse for youth. Talk to us about, that trajectory and how to, what's being done to make it continue to grow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a great question. It's robust, by the way, because a lot of things have to happen, come into place. I think at a high level, you look at public and private funding. It's one of the things that American football did better than any other contact equipment-based sport, right? Lower accessibility for lacrosse, hockey, golf, even baseball, because you have to have the means to pay for the equipment. American football is arguably more expensive, the technology of the helmets, shoulder pads, thigh pads, and stuff. But they went the public route in the 20th century to have all local municipalities fund our Pee Wee equipment. That's incredible because sport is an equalizer, and equalizer starts with access. And so there's the public route that can help grow the game. And then there's the private route. Folks like us who run the PLL, and we have a big youth division called PLL Play. We have a 501c3 that works with inner city programs, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA. So it's like a full scale effort from a public-private standpoint to literally force the access across the country and across the world. Coaching is often underrated, especially for stickball sports, because kids play a sport primarily because they're having fun. And a sport that is difficult to play means less fun out of the gates, therefore more likely to stop playing. And coaching, I grew up, my basketball coach coached lacrosse because we didn't have any lacrosse players in the area. And he was like sort of figuring it out. And the big shift for me was actually by the time I was able to put some balls in the net my freshman year in high school, we still had a basketball coach. And DeMatha's head coach at the time came over and saw me play and talked to my parents about transferring. And I looked at the opportunity to play for him and that team, which is a top 10 program in the state of Maryland, as an opportunity for me to learn from a great coach and acquire more skill faster. So I think coaching is a piece. And then the last one that I'll mention, speaking of you guys are in Atlanta and having hosted an Olympic, is we got the sport back into the Olympics for LA 2028. That was another full-scale effort by a lot of us, from development and design to pitching through LA 28, the IOC, the USOPC. And what that's going to do for me is unlock some more public funding, not just in the US, but every Olympic nation that wants to build a lacrosse program. So holistic, robust, but hopefully that's helpful in sort of understanding. Oh, one more thing from an education standpoint. Lacrosse is a Native American game. And it was created in the Six Nations, which is the Northeast. They occupy part of what we know as New York and part of what Canadians know as Ontario. And that game made its way into the U.S., first via Montreal, but made its way into the U.S. with NYU and Manhattan College. Then Johns Hopkins picked it up because they were competing against NYU and Manhattan. This is the late 1800s. So that's where like New York and Maryland was formed. And again, because of the requisite of having to have a, financier to get a sport to a level of what we've seen sort of the mainstream across America, we hadn't had that until probably the last 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, Paul, do you see that? Was there it sounds like it was kind of a slow growth in Atlanta. I guess we just kind of felt it was just all the transplants coming down from the Northeast and them teaching their kids lacrosse, and then those kids teach other. Do you see a tipping point in the last 20 years of where you said, okay, I think it's really struck a chord here in this country?
Yeah, I think so. If I look at the history of sports in America and those that proliferate, it's a bottom up and top down. So what you guys talked about is a bottom up approach. How do we get more youth programs, all the way up through high school playing? I think high school sanctioning is really important. You get funding and you also get to wear your letter jacket in school, going back to like the value of what kids trade on.
Yeah.
There are only 23 states that have sanctioned lacrosse. So a public route of trying to get more states to offer lacrosse such that they're not, fundraised through car washes and stuff in a club program with the local kids with passion. So I think that's really important for us to help facilitate. And then on on the rest of the front of how, or perhaps the tipping point, I think lacrosse players have done a really good job entrepreneurially getting to California and the Pacific Northwest and the Southeast and the Midwest to start lacrosse programs at affordable prices. Atlanta happens to be one of those hotbeds where I think there are some really great coaches. Denver had Bill Tierney, who went out in 2015 to help build their college program, but the impact of him then winning a national championship there on local programs in Colorado was dramatic. And then over the last 5 years since launching the PLL is where you add some jet fuel to the experiment in trying to drive value to lacrosse top down. So without the emergence of the NBA in the 80s, the NFL in the 60s, Major League Baseball in the early 1900s, you wouldn't have seen baseball, football, and basketball take off at a youth participatory level like they did. And we're hoping to do that at the PLL, affecting the next generation of players.
Interesting. Paul, jumping to, another piece that I think attracts young people is the opportunity to play at the next level in college. And you played at Johns Hopkins, you won national championships there. Talk a little bit about your recruiting process. And then if you will, I'd love to hear your thoughts, to kids today about, how proliferated is lacrosse nationally from a college standpoint, and how do they get noticed and get recruited today?
Yeah. Okay. So there's two parts to that. I think, for me, I was invited to a recruiting tournament my junior year, played well at it, and got a bunch of letters from head coaches. And then I had a really good rest of the summer and some momentum in the fall of my senior year. Those letters turned into a lot of phone calls and offers. This was before early recruiting emerged. And, I can talk about early recruiting in a second, but the ability to work on your craft and your performance as a player through high school, marry that with coaches from a way of timing of offering spots on their program and potentially scholarships is really important. Early recruiting really began after I committed, in that coaches were starting to get verbal commitments from sophomores, then freshmen, and then an eighth grader. And so that actually triggered, I think, a lot more sports specialization, which is what we talked about earlier, because the idea that, hey, I need to acquire skill faster so I can get a scholarship offer was real. The NCAA has regulated that over the last few years. So now official scholarship offers can only go out your junior summer, and there are no verbal offers that can be made. So that's really important, and actually a rare act by the NCAA for a non-revenue sport. So I think that was that. My recruiting visits I went on, this was foreign to a lot of kids who were early recruiting. I actually went on official visits. So your senior year, you go to campuses in the fall and you meet the coaches, you meet the team, you stay over, you watch practice. So I went to all five and made a decision to go to Johns Hopkins because of the rapport that I had with the coaches, the belief that I had from meeting the players on the team, the university holistically and what it could provide to me if I were to have graduated. And then frankly, the likelihood of that team winning a national championship, which they were number one for 4 consecutive years. That's why I committed to Johns Hopkins. If you're a kid now playing, the first thing I say is like, man, you've got to be the best. That needs to be the goal. There's this, you guys probably see it more than me because you're living it too, there is this feeling among young kids and parents that was not the case when I was growing up, which is, it should be relatively easy, or there should be a path for my son or daughter to play college sports. Like when I grew up, maybe it's me, when I grew up, if you played college sports, you were the creme de la creme.
Big deal.
it was really difficult
You
to
were a
attain,
stud.
which was kind of great because
Yeah.
that made high school sports and younger more fun, less pressure.
Yeah.
Kids have a lot of pressure now. I respect the ambition and the desire to play at the next level. And college lacrosse has only gotten more exciting with more and more parity. And then with the emergence of the PLL and an opportunity to make wages and sponsorship income and be on ESPN and ABC every weekend in the summer, that's become more exciting to kids. So the environments have changed, but the note of being the best player on your team, best player in the league, best player in the county, best player in the state, best player in the country should be the path of understanding the practicality of getting through.
I love that, man.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. You talked about your dad being a big influence. What coach did you have that was probably the biggest influence on you, and why?
Luckily, I had pretty much a coach at every level. I'll talk to my college coach, Dave Petramala. He instilled this level of kind of upper echelon competitiveness and work ethic. I'd never been around anyone like him that competed as hard and cared as much about sport. And I identified with that. And I still carry a lot of those attributes today around just, this obsession, the discipline to commit, the intensity during performance, the sort of meticulous studying of your opponent before and after on your performance, and then playing the long game, which, no one wins the national championship in the first week of play. So all that stuff was really valuable. And I think about Coach Petramala quite a bit and still keep a really strong relationship with him.
Paul, do you think that, how much of your success, and obviously one of the greatest lacrosse players ever, was just inborn, and how much of it was kind of nurtured in you from coaches? But you talk about just your desire, your competitiveness, your desire to work hard, your passion. Because with parents, and we talk about just being aware of what your kids are like. So how much do you think was just something you were born with, and how much do you think it was something that was kind of nurtured along the way?
Yeah, well, I think there's nature, nurture, and drive. The nature part, genetically blessed. I'm 6'3", 220 pounds, but I worked on the latter, had nothing to do with the former. Nurture primarily on the sport. And I think the evidence is, I first started playing when I was 12 and I sucked. So I really had to nurture that development, and that required great coaches and teammates who were willing to invest in me. The drive piece is really your ability to kick it into another gear. And I think that is something that I've had that is more unique than I thought it was for most of my playing career. That drive became an obsession. That drive became an identity, which is something I had to work on because that was unhealthy when I was in my mid to late 20s, and I just identified purely on how good of a player I was. You have to create balance. But as a young kid wanting to be the best, my balance was rendered really imbalance. And so it was all sport, all lacrosse, all the time. And that was part of my drive.
Your parents were never pushing you out, having to push you, from what I've read. Is that right?
Yeah. I listened to this interview that Wayne Gretzky gave where he said he never practiced. And we all know that Wayne Gretzky was insane for his craft. He had a hockey stick with him all the time. He brought it to his bedroom. But he said, I didn't look at it as practice. It's what I wanted to do. I had fun. I loved getting out on the ice in the pond in the back and just playing. And I think that we can call it gut check back to young players and parents is, are you practicing because you're being told to practice, or are you out there every day because you love it? If you love it, that's a signal to me that's like, right, let's keep investing in my son or daughter and their passion for whatever it is this.
That's awesome. So we want to spend kind of maybe the rest of our time talking about your book. As you said, it's coming out in a couple of weeks. We got a digital copy. I don't know if you've got a copy handy you could hold up. Maybe not. But
no, but I will send you a tangible one. I'm sorry it hasn't gotten there yet.
No worries. No worries. But I tell us, before we dig into the book itself, tell us, what was your motivation behind writing it? What are you hoping to accomplish with it?
Well, I love the creative arts. I've looked back at my career as an athlete and thought that it was primarily competitiveness, but I looked at the style of the drills that I was either coming up with on my own or watching across other disciplines and incorporating into the lacrosse field as a real creative exercise. And that began to really spawn for me when I was first professional as a lacrosse player and launched a YouTube channel, then launched a podcast. So there's this level of excitement around the creative arts matched with curiosity. When we launched the PLL, that was very much a creative endeavor. And our biggest business unit at this league is our production house, our creative services, our media and marketing, which I sort of oversee. On that road, we built our first documentary. So we learned how to produce an unscripted picture. One of our investors at the PLL is, I think, one of the more prolific writers around, in Ryan Holiday. And he writes a lot about stoicism. If you read Ego is the Enemy or The Obstacle is the Way, Ryan came to me my final year playing in the PLL before I retired and asked if I had ever thought about writing a book. I enjoy the exercise of writing quite a bit because it is the starting block for anything creative. And a lot of people miss that. Like, directors are often screenplay writers, and our composition team back here writes on storyboards before we go out and shoot anything. So I had that ability, but what I had yet to do is write a book, and it's quite a discipline. So even the book itself, the act of writing the book ran in parallel with the lessons that I was writing about, which is consistency, persistence, discipline, work ethic, humility, the ability to ask for help, all that stuff. But the idea was, hey, I have basically had to create a pathway for professional lacrosse players in my career. And I was doing it because I was passionate about it. Lacrosse isn't mainstream. And while part of me could say, oh, I wish it was, I would have gotten paid a lot more and had all these cool opportunities, because it wasn't, I had to learn how to make it better. Mm-hmm. And so those learnings was what Ryan was like, hey, let's get those in writing. And by the way, you've built relationships with Steph Curry to Venus Williams to Tony Robbins to Mark Cuban, and you have these lessons from them that you can weave in. So the book is meant to serve as a guide for anyone who wants to pursue their dreams of becoming a champion in whatever it is they do. And it's staged, as we talked about, from amateur to professional to beyond the game, such that you can find something that might fit you in your trajectory at this moment. And also, the lessons that we learn in life are reoccurring: letting go, competing, winning, losing, injury, failure. So I began that pursuit, and it took me about 2 years. Intellectually, it was incredibly challenging, but emotionally really rewarding.
I love it. You talk in there about, how the great ones lose. You already talked about that today. But one thing I love to hear you talk for a minute is being coachable, because I always kind of tell kids that if you're coachable, you're going to learn, you're going to continue to get better. And so why is it so important? Tell the kids, tell the parents to be coachable.
Oh, well, it's everything, because if you are incapable of being coached, then you're not going to improve, and then you're not going to reach your goals. We are coached in every walk of life, from our parents to our teachers to our sports coaches, to our tutors, to our therapists, sports psychologists. There are mentors, your bosses, your direct reports. It's part of how we as humans differentiate ourselves from any other species. So being coached is not only something that can benefit you, but if that's true, then you should seek as much and as good of coaching as possible. Howard Schultz, who is the CEO of Starbucks, he said of observing Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 CEOs, the most valuable characteristic that they can embody is the ability to ask for help. Because that's in sports too, because that just is a direct path to getting you to the place you want to be. So being coachable is really important. The last thing I'll share is coaching is not just technique. Coaching is also emotional, and sports are highly emotional. Tom Brady was the 4th-string quarterback at the University of Michigan, and he was getting ready to transfer because he was getting no snaps in practice. And then he went to the sports psychologist on campus, and he said, "Okay, Tom, let's just focus on the one snap you get. And here's what you got to do. You got to make it the best snap that you've had in your career. And if you demonstrate that, people will see how much you care and how effective you can become. So don't think about the totality of number of snaps and your ability to move up the depth chart and potentially start." So every practice thereafter, Tom would get called for 1 to 2 snaps of practice, and he would run out as if it was the 4th quarter of the Super Bowl. He would scream. He would bring everyone 100. He'd get under center, snap the ball, hand it off, and get off the field. And very quickly, the coaches notice and go, "We got to give that guy more snaps." And Tom gets more snaps, can show his ability more, can reach higher up the depth chart and begin to play. So that's also really good coaching. The emotional side of being like, "Yeah, I know you're not starting, but here's what you can do." And all of that stuff is critical to growth.
Another topic you have in the book that I'd love for you to talk about, because I think it's so relevant to life, but also for kids who are playing sports. You talk about focusing on what you can control. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, that's critical in sport and really in life. I'll reference the gentleman who wrote my foreword, who's been a close friend for a couple of decades now, and Bill Belichick. And he is famous for his saying of "do your job." And it is a commitment to yourself, a level of responsibility that you have to the team, that you're going to execute on your assignment. Nothing more, nothing less. That's the beauty of team sports, by the way. And we often hear it when we're losing by, a touchdown's worth of goals at halftime. And a coach will come out and say, "There's not a 7-point shot." And so it's a reminder that, like, hey, the best athletes and the best coaches in the world have a level of presence where they can just focus on the moment that they're in. How fast they're coming onto the field, the ground ball that's in front of them, what they're going to do when they miss a shot. All of that stuff is the discipline on just focusing on what you can control. All the other stuff is a waste of your energy and can potentially shift you off of your ability to execute your highest performance levels.
What about the chapter about competing only with yourself? Could you expound on that? Because I think I know what it means, but I'm sure you could do a better job.
I think in the end, we are our own biggest critics, and we set the bar for ourselves. And there is and will be times where you look across the aisle, or you look at a player on another team, or even a player on your team, and you're like, "That guy's doing better than me. I need to step my game up." That's healthy. But in the end, your ability to set the bar as high as possible, which means 2 things really: dreaming it and setting the goals around getting there, and then saying it. Whether you write it down to yourself, or you tell your parents, or you tell your coach, that is a big part of manifestation. And that is part of the game that you're playing with yourself. The other side of it is, if we can agree that practicing is the path, then every practice you should be competing against yourself, because you're on your own. So how do you raise the stakes? For me, it was, first getting 100 passes against the wall. Then it was 100 passes without a drop. Then it was 250 passes without a drop. Then it was how fast I could do 250 passes without a drop. And so you're constantly competing against yourself to raise your energy, to raise your performance, and also raise your level of compete. Those are some lessons that I've shared in those chapters.
I love it, because my final question to you is going to be, what's your advice for athletes? But I feel like that kind of answered, so I'm going to shift a little bit. My last question for you would be, what's your advice to the parents of these kids as they go? Because I think you're a poster child for this, and the fact that, again, you didn't even start playing lacrosse till you were 12. And the comments that we get, these guys know it all the time, are, my kid's 8, 9, 10. Does he needs to be at this camp, do this? And it's like, no, he doesn't.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. I think you have to focus on being the best parent, sort of confidant, support group, intellectual instigator, resourcer as possible, just like your son or daughter is trying to become the best athlete and teammate they can be. So what does that mean? I think, seek mentorship, seek coaching, seek a community. A lot of parents, I think, totally understand naturally that they're biased, right? So getting an objective view is going to be helpful if you have the means to. If you don't, again, try to link up with some parents of the kids on your son or daughter's team, and just talk it out. The other is listen to your kid and the environment. I often see parents sort of projecting what they want their kid to be or what they believe their kid's potential is, and not actually asking their kid what they want and what they believe their potential to be. That's important. And then the third is, again, depending on means. But as my dad would say, he would do his best to get us into any program that we had the passion for. And that was rec sports. And it was probably $200 a season, which wasn't immaterial for us. And that's why my mom made sure I didn't quit in the first season, because they had committed $200 for me to play spring lacrosse league. But that type of resourcing is part of it, and understanding what fits for you, and not having a sense of FOMO or jealousy if your son or daughter's mate is playing in the private club organization. Remind yourself that both paths are equal into your goals and desires of success.
Hey, Paul, before we let you go, I'd love to know, we have a lot of people in our audience that are big lacrosse fans, and we know because they've sent things into us asking us to have you on. Tell us what your vision is for the PLL. Where is it going over the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see this whole lacrosse, world, heading?
Well, I'll start with our mission, which is to trailblaze the future of professional sports. It's player and fan focused. And that lives across the way that we put on our games, our event weekends, how we broadcast the games, our partnerships, how we're accommodating our fans who are attending, the media and marketing associated with it, the give back to the community. We want to innovate. And we feel that we have the ability to do that because we don't have 100 years of historical context or individual owners that are pulling for their own rights against each other. So being able to actually start in 2018, which is when we announced the PLL, enabled us to say, hey, if Major League Baseball was built in 2018, how would it look? And so that's the first part. Now, what we want to become, talking about big goals and saying it, is a top 5 sports league in North America. And sort of the big four, if you call it, is baseball, basketball, football, and hockey. And then maybe MLS creeps in there. The UFC's making a run. So it is, it's definitely a challenging goal, but we believe the counterpoint to it is what the MLS and UFC have done in the last 25 years, we think we can do in half, because we have the ability to speed up because of the internet, because of new technology, because of modern media like social and platforms where you can build community much quicker and more affordably than you could have in the 90s. And so that's that. Now, what it will look like for our players and our teams is higher wages, more sponsorship revenue opportunity, more expansion, and a pretty exciting, I think, few years in front of us as we look at the Olympics coming to the U.S. in 2028.
Exciting stuff.
Man, it'll be awesome. But, well, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I know we're excited to have our first lacrosse player, because we've gotten tons of stuff. And, of course, as I said, as a dad now of a lacrosse guy for 2 years, man, I've been – my son's coach loves you, so I've just heard about you all the time. He actually had a John Hopkins helmet he wanted me to come on and with it, and I was like, man, calm down.
I'd like to add that, I mean, one of our missions is to kind of help parents navigate their kids, to help them navigate that journey to be the best versions of themselves after their sports career is over with. And what's so impressive about you and is that you were the top of your sport. I mean, you were the best at your sport, and yet you didn't end there. Like you have a passion now for your post, athletic career, and it's very inspirational. And I hope our audience and our parents and our kids see that. I mean, it's just part of your journey. It's part of your life's journey. It's not the thing, but it could be just part of it. And you're such a great role model, and we really thank you so much.
I appreciate, guys, that the last segment of the book, Beyond the Game, is dedicated to sort of the afterlife and how to leverage all of these amazing skills and qualities that we get to build through amateurism and some of us professional sports. Those things transcend. There's a reason why a lot of Fortune 500 companies target student athletes in the recruiting realm. That level of work ethic and compete and teamwork can transcend, not just a direct path as I've taken from playing as an athlete to operating as a sports owner, but to your relationships, other industries, and the ability to give back to the community.
Well, our message is for 98% of people, that's the ROI in spending all this money on sports. Tremendous, life lessons. Your book is full of them. So we're going to put something on our social media about your book that's coming out. But thanks for showing the way on all that. And thanks for being here.
Yeah, you get to be out in LA doing all that stuff. My retirement's hanging with these two bozos doing this. So.
You're set better than mine.
Paul, we appreciate it, man. Best of luck.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Hey, guys, Jeff Rancourt here. Thanks for checking out Pure Athlete, and subscribe to our channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you go to listen to our podcast.